Good afternoon on this May 17th, 2023 day. My name is Stuart Sinclair Weeks. I am a native son of Concord, Massachusetts, where we are. We are currently in Minuteman National Park by the Old North Bridge, where the shot was fired, heard around the world, that launched our American Revolution, our battle for independence. As mentioned, I'm a native son of Concord and founder of its Center for American Studies. I'm also here today wearing the hat of the inaugurator of We the People, the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service, which I'll say a bit more about. We have the Center for American Studies held many programs here. In our first 5 years, we brought over 500 international leaders from 68 nations through our programs. We gathered here at this very spot where we turned our international visitors and leaders into Concord citizens. The scene we set was the day after the American Revolution was begun. The shot was fired, heard around the world. We turned them into, as I mentioned, Concord citizens who had a question. What do we do? It's April, the 19th of April, springtime. It's time to plant. It's time to tend to the farms. Yet half our folks are in town in the blockade that arose against the British in Boston. What do? We have decisions to make. Among the leaders we had from the 68 nations were those from countries that were in the midst of revolutions or that themselves remembered well revolutions they'd gone through. So this is the scene where we find ourselves. As I mentioned, the hat I'll be speaking about today is that as the inaugurator of the citizens movement to revive the spirit of public service. I want, before I go into that, to honor those who've gone before me, both Concord citizens as well as my own forebears. With respect to the former, Concord, Musketequit, its native name, was a home of the praying Indians, those who grasped something of the genius of Christianity and dedicated themselves to it out of the genius of their own peoples. I speak of them as a spirited praying Indians. Concord then became America's first non-native inland community, as opposed to an outpost or settlement, the first step into the interior of this land, Turtle Island. It was, after that, the crucible is mentioned of the American Revolution, where the shot was fired right behind me, heard around the world. Later, as many know, it was the home of some of America's most prophetic voices, Emerson, Thoreau, Louisa May Alcott, her father Bronson, the dean of the Concord School of Philosophy and Literature, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Sophia, our Joan of Arc, Margaret Fuller, for a time and a half, and many lesser lights that burned no less genially. Later in the 60s, when the National Geographic did one of their first articles on the computers, Concord, 3 of the 4 individuals were interviewed for that article, if my memory serves me correctly, were Concordians. So there's a fair bit of history here. In that history, we will relate today to We the People, the citizens movement to revive the spirit of public service. And in this regard, I also want to acknowledge my own forebears. It's interesting the families we find ourselves in. Mine is one of the older military, business, political families in our nation, going back, I've been told, to William Bradford, governor of the Plymouth colony who came over on the Mayflower, as well as more recently, my grandfather, who was the Secretary of Commerce with Eisenhower, and that individual who led the delegation of American businessmen to Europe after the war, the Second World War, that came up with the recommendation for the Marshall Plan. His father, my great-grandfather, John Wingate Weeks, was one of the central actors in one of the central dramas of our age, the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. He went on to become Secretary of War in 2 cabinets, having been voted the most peaceful cadet in his class at Annapolis, and later a presidential candidate. I'm here, as I've mentioned, to inaugurate the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. We, the people. I'm here as a standard bearer, standard being a flag. That is, the standard bearer goes first into the battle. Nothing more than a standard bearer and placeholder on behalf of we, the people, for constitutional president of the United States of America and for America. Nothing more than a standard bearer placeholder. That is, I do not anticipate assuming such an office, rather holding the standard in the place for one who will, on behalf of we the people, and I will go into that, a rather unorthodox perspective. So what do I mean by holding a place bearing the standard? I'd like to offer 5 examples of that in my interactions with Tulsi Gabbard, Dennis Kucinich, Robert F. Kennedy, former President Donald Trump, and a recent note to President Joseph Biden. Beginning with Tulsi, I got to know Tulsi fairly well in her last campaign. We talked on a number of occasions. At the last event where we met, my intention was to go and to listen. I'd had, as I said, a number of conversations with her. I didn't want to take her time unduly. After she spoke, this was in the Nashua, New Hampshire Library, there was a question and answer period. Since nobody walked up to the mic, I paused and then went forth to get the ball rolling, I hoped. Tulsi, to her credit, was about 2 feet in front of the microphone. She was present, she was listening. I said, Tulsi, I bring you words from your sister, Catherine Drinker Bowen, author of the book, a remarkable book, The Miracle of Philadelphia, about the Constitutional Convention, the constituting of our nation. Catherine Drinker Bowen wrote, if we, the people, I said, Tulsi, should ever become an entity, a corporate being, imagine what power that incorporation may one day represent. If we, the people, should ever become an entity, a corporate being, imagine what power that incorporation may one day represent. I then proceeded to say, Tulsi, representatives represent, governors govern, presidents preside. And that's exactly what George Washington did as president of the Constitutional Convention. He presided 5 long, sweltering, decisive months. He said ne'er a word, he listened. Listen to the people. I looked Tulsi in the eyes 2 feet in front of me, and I said, Tulsi, if there's any candidate who I believe at that time could understand these words, it is you. I said, listen to the people. And I turned abruptly and departed. Tulsi nodded. She took it in, was my impression. I departed to leave the impression of those words. As I turned, the auditorium, the library, a large space, erupted in applause, not for me, but for these words. Listen to the people. That is exactly what I mean when I speak of this role I've assumed as a placeholder to create a space where the people can be heard. The second meeting was with Dennis Kucinich. This was the morning after he was among the Democratic candidates who presented themselves to the nation. Dennis was in the second tier, one might say, in days of Bill Bradley and John Kerry. As such, he was not afforded the respect, one might say, that the first tier candidates were afforded. The interview, his 4 minutes that he was granted to present himself and his candidacy to the nation, were introduced with a question by the commentator. I believe it was Ted Koppel, if I remember correctly. The words that Ted said, we hear Congressman Kucinich, and you bankrupted the city of Cleveland as its boy mayor, So Dennis began on the defensive, as opposed to being able to bring forward what he'd prepared with his staff about his nomination. Dennis responded in classic Kucinich family fashion. With much power and force and speed, he filled his 4 minutes. When we had breakfast the next morning, I asked him a question. I said, Dennis, imagine if your response had been the following. So the question once again was, we hear, Congressman Kucinich, that you bankrupted the city of Cleveland as its boy mayor. Imagine, Dennis, if you'd responded, why do you say that, Ted? Pause. Do you know the facts? Pause. Are you interested in the truth? Pause. I said, Dennis, I think if you'd responded in such a way that everybody watching the television would have shifted in their seats for a moment. Because even if they didn't understand whether you did or did not bankrupt the city of Cleveland, they would have understood something else even more important. And that is that you know how to speak to power. You are a veritable public servant. Dennis could hear those words, and in fact, he asked me to run his first in the nation primary in New Hampshire. The third meeting with Donald Trump, then a candidate for president, occurred in Manchester, New Hampshire. In the Queen City, I was invited to a small gathering and asked to prepare a question. I went up to Donald at the end with the question, and that was, Donald, what would be the toughest thing for you to have the wind all about us? Wind all about us. The question was, Donald, what would be the toughest thing for you elected president? Donald paused and said it would be letting people go, firing people. I looked at him and I was moved to put my hand on his heart, this fellow citizen, among everything else. And I said, Donald, you have a good heart. And he said, yes, I was given a good heart. I had occasion to follow up with him. And I said, Donald, the Tocqueville said, was reputed to have said, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. I said, enough of all this greatness. America is the greatest. America must be the greatest. We are the greatest. Let us just be good. Donald could hear those words. I move on to conversations I've had with Bobby Kennedy, who stepped into the ring. In a more recent exchange, when Bobby said, when I'm elected president, I understood what he meant, but I said, Bobby, good God, enough of this. How about when God and the people willing, I'm elected president? Do you have a crystal ball? Do you wish to second guess the good Lord? That wasn't meant as a critique. I think Bobby has tremendous courage, tremendous devotion. Having lost his own father and uncle, he's as human as the rest of us in his own ways. But I think he brings something very important onto the scene at this point in time. And lastly, some words that I penned to Joe Biden. I need to dig up one moment. Mr. President, I was moved, deeply moved, not just by Trevor Noah's words at the 2022 White House Correspondents' Dinner, but by how his words, at times not just sharp, but cutting, seemingly incriminating, resounded across your face, your countenance, your mortal frame. I was moved by your humanity, including your ability to laugh at yourself, your aspiring self. I trust these words of mine are clear. Comic relief, indeed, for such an office. Amazing, saving grace. So friends, these 5 exchanges with Tulsi Gabbard, with Dennis Kucinich, with Donald Trump, with Bobby Kennedy, and these words to our President Joe Biden give a sense perhaps of the space that I'm seeking to hold, safeguard on behalf of we the people. That brings us to the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. We met here on Patriots' Day, the 19th of April, with words from those noted and the presence of representatives of the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitution Party. And we look forward to the Independent Party of America connection there. For all of these parties have something to contribute to the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. It is summed up in Dr. Martin Luther King's words. Revival of the spirit of public service. Dr. King said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. The wind has settled from yesterday. Picking up our thread, I want to address the distinctive elements of we the people, the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. We are not a party. We're not partisan, divisive. Rather, every fellow citizen of goodwill who's committed to public service is, in our eyes, an honorary member of the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. That means, friends, if you listening are committed to the revival of the spirit of public service, to servantship, You are, in our eyes, an honorary member of the citizens movement, which requires nothing whatsoever, for we're not a campaign with candidates, but we're a celebration with celebrants whose focus is first and foremost on our responsibilities, that which gives our rights their ultimate right, we believe, and purpose. Those celebrants are assuming with neither hoopla nor expectation the mantle or office that we feel called to, from President of our aspiring United States all the way up to public servants, local officials in our towns and cities. In note, a write-in, write-on campaign or celebration. That is, we're not going to be on the ballot. It's a write-in, write-on celebration. We're not running for office or for anything. We're not in a race. Rather, we are walking the talk. The assuming or assumption spoken of is as a flag or standard bearer, a placeholder for such constitutional offices on behalf of we, the people. Standard bearer, placeholder, what these terms mean is that we're bearing and endeavoring to set the standard, hold the place for the constitutional offices in question. That is, looking ahead to the upcoming historic election, I and others who are stepping forward look indeed forward to the prospect of passing on at the 11th hour the standard we are bearing, the place we are holding to those destined to serve, if such there be. Otherwise expressed, the celebration is not about me, any one of us alone. It is about we, the people. Like our predecessors, the sons and daughters of liberty, we are a fellowship, a band of brothers and sisters. There's no party structure, no apparatus, no bosses or rank and file. Rather, the people, we move with the spirit of service, servantship, as each is inspired in his or her individual and historic conscience. Given the foregoing, we seek no endorsements nor votes. For as expressed, we consider that every fellow citizen of goodwill recognizes such a commitment to service, servantship, wishes us well. That is, instead of saying, give me your time, give me your energy, give me your money, give me your hopes, and if I'm elected, I'll do A, B, C. If not, see you later. I'm out of here. Instead of these promises, we're doing it. We're walking the talk, serving. If our service is true, if it meets the real and mounting needs of those around us, that service will be recognized, appreciated, will attract attention in and of itself. We seek no normal political activity or support. It'll seek and it'll attract attention in and of itself. And the attention, the publicity will attract in terms funding, without having to cozy up to either editors or donors. God bless them both. What we are celebrating is our victory. For we, the people, can't lose as long as we're doing the work that has been ordained for us, are true to our calling. as long as we're giving it our best, commit ourselves to service, public service. Lincoln gave voice to the victory spoken of, the victory we envision in his resounding passage from the Gettysburg Address, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Given the victory noted, our celebration begins with the memorial service, endings and beginnings, inspired by the memory and undying spirit of Georgia Congressman John Lewis, a stalwart figure within the civil rights movement. Towards the end of Lewis's life, he said that the means of reform, the kind of reform we seek, will be, he said, drama, community drama, such as the memorial service that we've inaugurated in Concord, New Hampshire, at the last days of the elections, the midterm elections, and which we will be further holding, celebrating this 4th of July in Concord, Massachusetts. That information will be on our website. The purpose of the memorial service is to put that baneful, divisive, partisan spirit out of its misery, to pay it our last respects, lay it to rest, and give it its last rites. One said, ailing spirit rests in peace. We, the people, look forward to turning ever more fully with enthusiasm to the work before us, to helping to midwife the birth of that ever new freedom that is not only our unalienable birthright, but our responsibility, our divinely ordained responsibility as we the people. Towards that end, amidst the issues, the legions of issues that surround and distract, that divide and would conquer us, our work, the citizens' movement's work, our celebration focuses on honing the deeper underlying issue, capital ISSUE, that waits to unite and liberate, truly liberate us, the US, as painstakingly, joyously outlined in the following interview that introduces we the people, the citizens' movement to revive the spirit of public service. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.